Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is a couple of the Foot Knights which have just been released from Wargames Atlantic. Now these are in collaboration with the Baron's War and they're very cool. They've got a load of character, they're very cool, a lot of fun to assemble, and it turns out even more fun to paint. So because the period that they cover, the rules around heraldry I'll probably mention a couple of times weren't quite so strict as we tend to think. So I really made these up and just had a go at it. Had some fun. All of the paints will be listed in the description below, and I am going to jump back and forth between a couple of these miniatures as we go. So let's get started. So you'll probably see in the background there, I've got a couple of these other miniatures primed up and ready to go. I'm going to paint a couple of them at the same time. Now once your miniatures are assembled, first thing to do as always is to prime them. And here I've used matte black from the Army Painter. I'm going to recommend black no matter what brand it is you're going to use, because most of what we're going to do over the top of this will work quite well over black. Now ordinarily doing something which is going to be predominantly light colors, you might even try doing this over white or a light primer of some description, maybe a gray, and painting the metallics in differently. But I think because of the way we're going to work this, it's going to work better from a black primer. But if you are going to do it this way, what I have is one of my scraggly old makeup brushes. The brush that you use for this is really not going to matter very much at all. We aren't dry brushing terribly carefully, we're really more overbrushing. So load up your brush with a bit of paint. This here is Leadbelcher from CITADEL. And just go ahead and bing bang bosh, just overbrush all of the mail and the armor. Don't worry if you hit the fella himself, particularly up around this chap's bare head. He has got a ringlet of mail around his neck. But yeah, get in there. Anything which is going to be metallic, just dry brush it metallic. Now that we're not violently dry brushing him, we should probably stay on the cork. Now, when it comes to painting faces on these guys, you're quite lucky in that you can assemble the entire set with no bare heads. So if you don't like painting faces, you're onto a winner. All the same, what I have here, this is a mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Fleshtone. This is just roughly half and half, maybe a little bit more of Bugman's Glow. You can use neat Bugman's Glow here. I just prefer lightening it up a little bit with some of the Cadian Fleshtone, because when we come to shade it, it will mean a much less stark transition when we highlight it afterwards. So this will probably need 2 coats. All the same, it'll go on nice and smooth. Now for a couple of these guys, I'm going to paint their tabards or overcoats or surcoat. I can never remember the names of some of these medieval things, so I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments. But the jackety, coaty whatnot that these guys are wearing, I'm going to give a couple of layers of Corax white, maybe even one, because I don't necessarily want these to be white. But as you see, it covers very, very well, even straight over black. Now, Corax white does have a reputation. I know some folks really swear that it is, the devil incarnate, but hasn't been my experience. What I would recommend is when you first crack it open, add a couple of drops of something like Lamian Medium or similar into it, and you do want to pop in a couple of agitators, a little stainless steel ball bearings or similar, because once you give it a good shake, and it's got a medium in there which will help to thin it out and not be quite so chunky, you have, a look at it, a white that's almost perfect coverage in one go. This is going to suit our purposes just fine. Like I said, most of them are not going to be white, but for the brighter colors that I want to put over the top, I would be mad to try and paint them over the black. So instead, we throw down some white first. Now that is just one coat of Corax white over black. As you can see, there is still a little bit of the primer showing through. But if you are going to be painting something like yellow or red over the top of this, this is fine. This is a really good base coat. I actually really like how the white looks on this guy though, so I am going to give him a second coat. Not on the other fellas, but this dude, yeah, let's go for a nice solid white. So one of the things that I think is really neat about this kit is actually the belts right around the waist, because it makes quartering the clothing really simple. So what I'm going to do, I have here, this is Altdorfgard blue, and you'll see there's a reason why I've laid down the white first. What I'm going to do is I'll lay down, first of all, a little bit there, but then flip him upside down, and it'll be easier, there we go, to attack him from this angle and quarter the other side of his clothes. So here, using the belt at his waist, we know where we want that split to be. So I can do that, and then straight up, and there we go. Now I can fill that out a little bit more easily. Now after 2 coats, we have a much more solid color. He's looking pretty nice. There are 1 or 2 little splodges where I'm going to come back with some of that Corax white before we shade him, just to tidy up. But as always, I recommend leave your tidy up as late as you can, because any other mistakes you might make, you can just fix them all at the same time. Now, following the same procedure, what I'm going to do is grab over here on this chappy. I'm going to use a yellow. Let's see what I've got. Okay, after a bit of internal deliberation, I'm going to use Aerial Yellow. Now, yellow is notoriously difficult to get to paint straight. Some folks will recommend painting over a pink, but in this case, the white is going to be fine. I want this to be relatively quick. Now, all the same, you'll see we are still getting some of the white showing through, so this will take a second coat. Yellow as much as possible. Keep your brush moving in the same direction as you apply it, and once you've laid down an area, move away from it. Don't keep moving your brush over wet paint. Otherwise, you're going to pick it up, you're going to add texture, and it is going to be pretty difficult from that point on to get a nice finish to it. So you see, as much as possible, brush go in the same way. But yeah, let's have a look at this after the second coat. Now, 2 coats of yellow later, that's what we've got. Not unhappy with that. I'm going to pop the red on him a little bit later, because now what I want to do is use here Lupercal Green on this fella's entire cloak. So this, like the others, probably need 2 coats. But here I'm not going to worry about quartering him or anything. It's just going to be one solid green color. Tell you what, man, those are bright. I'm really looking forward to shading this so it doesn't look quite so garish. Now, I have painted the backs of the shields with the white as well, because these were made of wood, but very commonly they would have like a linen or even a parchment covering on the back, because it just looked nicer. So I'm using here Banshee Brown from the Army Painter. I think I've watered that down a bit too much. Any light beige or brown will do here. I would recommend Baneblade Brown, but mine ran out, so I'm using this instead. Now pick yourself a nice dark brown with decent coverage. What I've got here is Oak Brown from the Army Painter, and we're going to paint in these straps. Now, the reason why I say pick one which covers well is so that you can go over an area once and you're done. The fewer brush strokes you have to make, the less likely you are to end up making a mistake. So around all of these now, take your time as you get close to the chest and what have you. It's interesting to me that once you've done the straps, they start looking way more finished. What I'm going to do now, I've actually, I've been humming and hawing about how I'm going to deal with this shield, but I think I'm going to quarter it like his tabard, or whatever that is called. So I've gone back to my Altdorfgard blue, and I'm just going to dab. Let's try the center here. Okay, that looks about right. So what I'm going to do now is hold him in such a way that if I just move my hand back and forth like this, I'm basically traveling in the same direction each time. So as much as possible, I want to force my hand to move just one way. And I should get a nice straight line as a result. Doesn't always work, but luckily that Corax white, as we've seen, covers pretty well. So it's never going to be so messed up that I can't fix it with a bit of the base coat. Now, full disclosure, I have tidied that up with a bit of white now, but using that same technique, you can very easily paint stripes, even diagonal chevrons, if that's the sort of thing. Remembering that heraldry, such as it was still quite simple at this stage. You would have some very complex designs, and I am going to use a transfer on one of these guys later for that anyhow. But just for getting guys on the table, a nice simple shield like this will work wonders. Now what I'm going to move on to, speaking of nice and simple, grab a little bit of Xandri dust, and you see this fella here has his padded undercoat visible hanging out the bottom here. So I'm going to base coat that with Xandri dust. And I am also going to use this to paint in the beard on our helmetless guy, because it makes a really nice base coat for blonde. Now we're going to tidy up some of the metal work, things like weapons, scabbards and what have you. I'm using here, this is Iron Hand Steel. Mostly I want a solid color as I go over. This is very slightly lighter than Leadbelcher as well. So if you want to brighten up things like helmets and the like, you can also give them a coat of this now. This is also a good one to dot in any buckles or what have you that you might have covered over. Now here is one stage where things can very rapidly get out of hand. What I'm talking about is adding detailing in the form of gold or bronze, because honestly, it wasn't all that common. Even for the kings and what the like, they would have very nicely made stuff. But introducing like an alloy or another metal created essentially a weak point in some parts of the armor. So unless you were putting something on there which was purely decorative, it wasn't all that common to see it done in another color. But I do want a bit of warmth on a couple of these guys. So this is weapon bronze from the Army Painter. And honestly, anything similar will work perfectly well. Now that's maybe a little bit Hollywood, but I like the look. Now speaking of, maybe not quite right, but I like the look, ordinarily I shy away from using a pure black on miniatures because it looks a bit unnatural in some cases. But what I am using here, this is black from Vallejo. Covers like a dream, and I'm going to paint in the scabbards, weapon grips as well, and I'm also going to paint in the shield on the chap wearing green. Now once at last all those little oddments and bits of cleanup are done, we're ready to shade our miniatures. And I want to talk about this rather quickly, but it is important because what I'm going to use is the old marine juice. Now this is an old army painting sauce, essentially cooked up by the Forge World painting team. Now what it used to be was equal parts of Nuln Oil, Reichland Flesh Shade, and Lahmian Medium. Now, they changed the recipe. Or rather, Games Workshop changed how their shades are made so Nuln Oil doesn't cover in the same way as it used to. So making exactly this, unfortunately, it's just not going to happen anymore. What you can do instead, though, is to grab yourself a bottle of Dark Tone from the Army Painter, Reichland Flesh Shade, those are both 18 milliliters, chuck those in a bottle, and then chuck in 24 milliliters, an entire bottle of Lahmian Medium. It's going to be ever so slightly thinner than what you're seeing here, but it's pretty close. Why I'm using this is the fact that it's a little bit warmer and not quite as staining as Agrax Earthshade tends to be these days. You can use Agrax Earthshade, you can use any shade you fancy really, but do thin it out, because anything put neat over these guys is going to quite significantly change the colors. This has got a little bit of warmth to it, so it suits these guys down to the ground, I think. So starting from the top, let's just blorp over the entire miniature. And the thing I like about the color that this is that over white, it will look a little bit grubby when it first goes on, but keep the faith, keep it moving in the same direction. But over the blue, what happens is an interesting thing, is the reddish tint in it will go a little bit purple, which, again, works super well. So we're going over the entire miniature, armor and all, and when you're done, give it a couple of seconds and then cruise back with your brush and just make sure that there's no big blobs anywhere, particularly on the shield and down on the bottom of the clothing. If you do have any of those, just move them away while they're still wet. Then with a bit of luck, you'll have something that looks like this. Now you'll see they're not the most detailed things going, and particularly when it comes to the white, we've got a slightly grubby finish around some of the back there, but for the most part, that suits me down to the ground. All we're going to do is a couple of highlights. I mean, even if you want to, there's no reason you couldn't base these up and put them on the table now, but let's do a couple of quick highlights just to add a bit more depth here. So starting with our chap in yellow, what I'm going to use is Flash Gets Yellow. Wind up some of this onto a size 2 brush, something which keeps a point, and just add a little bit of this, just vertical lines. This will look quite bright going on, but it will, what's the word? It'll dull down quite a bit as it dries. And yeah, you can do as much or as little of this as you like to sort of sell the look. Now that's nice and quick, maybe a little bit more blocky than I would ordinarily like, but I am working deliberately quite quickly, and for these guys to be on the table. So what I'm going to move to is Wild Rider Red for the red. Likewise, this one is pretty intense when it goes on, so you may find that thinning this down with a little bit more water than usual will help your application of it. But all the same, be brave. And just follow little bits of the edges, the corners and what have you that you want to stand out. You'll see, of course, I have highlighted the other guys as well. The technique is the same. I've popped the colors for those in the description so that you don't miss out. In particular, if you are using Army Painter paints here, then the, what do they call them, flexible triads will probably be quite useful in helping you pick your highlight colors. All the same, I'm now going to turn to Cadian Fleshtone, and we're going to paint in most of this guy's face again. I'm going to leave just a little bit of the shaded skin right in the recesses. Now I might have overdone it with the skin tone there, and I've lost some of the definition around his head. So what I've done here is mixed up, this is half and half Reichland Flesh Shade and some Lamian Medium. You can use neat shade if you fancy, but it's going to make them look quite red. Whereas thinning it down a little, I can get a bit of warmth back into that skin tone, and I don't have to worry about completely repainting the face afterwards. Because that's what got us into this mess in the first place. While it might not be immediately obvious on screen, it is much nicer looking in reality. Once that has dried, you can grab your Kislev flesh, and now we'll do the bits that we normally would like. Nose, cheekbones, brow, and what have you, to give it a little bit more depth to his face. And then just a little bit of Ungor flesh on the beard. I quite like it for highlighting, because blonde isn't yellow, I would say, but this has got a yellowish tint to it, and a little bit of warmth, being as it's meant to be a skin tone. Alright, now what I'm going to do is have a rummage through my collection of water slide transfers, see if I can find anything which looks about right. I don't really have anything specific to the period, so it's going to be a bit of eyeballing. Might be a little bit of Hollywood, but hopefully I'll find something that looks cool. After that, I'm going to pop their bases on. Description will have the recipe for that, and we'll get a look at what they look like when they're all finished. And so there at last, our knights are complete. And as you can see, the point isn't so much about what colours you're using because, well, anything goes. The medieval period was a lot more colourful than we tend to think of, and certainly Hollywood's idea of mud and brown is probably a little further from the mark than you might want to paint as well. So these were a lot of fun, and I got to admit, trying to find the right transfers, I lucked out a little bit with I think it's a boar's head with like a ring in its nose. That seemed suitably extra. Though the fleur-de-lis, I think, might have been a little bit early. All the same, it looks cool, and I'm not all that fussed about them representing specific guys. So, as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.